The history of the USS Arizona, BB-39. Named after the 48th state, the USS Arizona would be ordered by the United States Navy on March 4, 1913. The cost would be just shy of $16 million. She would be built at the Brooklyn Navy Yard in New York. The Navy Yard was on the East River and was established in 1801. The shipbuilding would continue there until the 1960s, at one time employing over 75,000 workers. It was actually nicknamed the Can-Do Shipyard. The keel of the USS Arizona would be laid down on March 16, 1914. The construction would last almost a year. The Arizona would be launched on June 19, 1915. The ship would later be commissioned on October 17, 1916. The ship's sponsor was Esther Ross, and due to prohibition during the time period, a bottle of sparkling wine from Ohio and a bottle of water from the Roosevelt Dam were used for the christening. Her designation would be USS Arizona BB-39. She would be commanded by Captain John McDonald. The ship would be a Pennsylvania-class battleship. She would displace over 32,000 tons with a deep load. The battleship would be 608 feet long. Her beam would be about 97 feet, and her draft would be 29 feet 3 inches with a deep load. The Arizona would be propelled by 12 water tube boilers with 29,366 standard horsepower. This would generate 21,898 kilowatts during her sea trials. With 4 propeller shafts, she had 4 sets of steam turbines. Her top speed would be 21 knots or 24 miles per hour. Her range would be 8,000 nautical miles. Her crew complement would be 1,087 men. The crew would increase in size to 1,358 men in 1931. The ship's armament would be 4 triple 14-inch 356mm guns, 22 single 5-inch 127mm guns, 4 single 3-inch 76mm AA guns, and 2 21-inch 533mm torpedo tubes. She would be protected by 13 and 5/8-inch belt. Her bulkheads would be 13 and 1/8 inches thick. Her barbettes would be 13 inches. The ship's turrets were 18 inches and her decks were 5 inches. Early in her career during World War I, the Arizona was used as a gunnery training ship. This helped train men in armed merchant ships that needed to cross the Atlantic in supply convoys. On November 11, 1918, a ceasefire was declared ending the fighting for World War I. The USS Arizona was part of a 10-battleship, 28-destroyer fleet that escorted President Woodrow Wilson to the Paris Peace Conference. The president was traveling on the ocean liner George Washington. To be more specific, the USS George Washington, ID 3018. In the years that followed, the USS Arizona was mainly used for routine training exercises, mostly in the Atlantic Ocean. These activities were referred to as Fleet Problem 9, and in January 1929 she would be modernized at the Norfolk Navy Shipyard. This upgrade to the ship would last until March 19th of 1931. Among the updates were new tripod masts, surmounted by 3-tiered fire control directors for the main and secondary armament, replaced the old hyperboloid cage masts. This was a very noticeable upgrade and change to the ship. The number of 5-inch guns was reduced to 12, and the guns repositioned 1 deck higher, and 8 25 caliber 5-inch anti-aircraft guns replaced the 3-inch guns with which she had been originally equipped. These changes increased her crew to 92 officers and 1,639 enlisted men. The ship's main gun turrets were modified to increase the maximum elevation of their guns to 30 degrees. The compressed air catapult on the quarterdeck was replaced by one that used black powder. Her deck armor was increased by an addition of 1.75 inches or 44 millimeters, thickness of special treatment steel, and the ship was bulged to protect from torpedoes. An additional bulkhead was added to the sides of the boiler room for the same purpose. The ship's 2 submerged torpedo tubes were removed because they were deemed unlikely to be used. The areas left were then subdivided to fight compartmental flooding. Arizona's mechanical components were almost completely replaced. Her high-pressure turbines were replaced by more powerful gear turbines from the former battleship USS Washington, and 6 new boilers replaced her original ones. Their additional power offset the ship's increased displacement. As demonstrated during her sea trials, Arizona made 20.7 knots with 35,081 standard horsepower with 26,160 kilowatts at a displacement of 38,258 fully loaded tons. After her upgrades, the USS Arizona would host President Herbert Hoover during his vacation to the Caribbean, after which she would head to Rockland, Maine for her sea trials. She also added a catapult fitted to the top of the gun turret number 3. Shortly after this upgrade, she would be transferred to the Pacific Fleet. Among the ship's interesting history, around the time she arrived in the Pacific Fleet, she would be featured in a movie by Warner Brothers starring James Cagney. The film would be called Here Comes the Navy and would feature the ship's exterior as well as footage from her decks. Directed by Lloyd Bacon, the film centers around a cocky young man with a chip on his shoulder played by James Cagney. A construction worker, Chesty O'Connor, is after Biff Martin, who happens to be an officer in the U.S. Navy. He enlists in the U.S. Navy in an attempt to get revenge on him, and even gets stationed on the same ship as him. However, he ends up falling in love with Martin's sister after meeting her on shore leave. This, of course, would lead to an interesting encounter. The ship would also get some bad publicity, as on July 26, 1934, off Cape Flattery, the USS Arizona would collide with the Umatilla, which would be a fishing trawler. At the time, the trawler was being towed, and as a result of the accident, 2 men aboard the Umatilla would be killed. After an investigation by the U.S. Navy, Arizona's captain, Captain McGillivray Milne, was court-martialed. The USS Arizona's captain would later be replaced by Captain George Baum. It would be Rear Admiral Samuel W. Bryant who would assume command of the ship as he commanded the Battleship Division II. He used the USS Arizona as his flagship. He would later be replaced by Rear Admiral George T. Pettengill on March 4, 1935, as the Arizona would participate in fleet problem activities. After a gunnery practice exercise that caused damage resulting in a fire and activation of the ship's sprinkler system, the USS Arizona would be left in port. This was a result of a limited budget in an attempt to save fuel. The Arizona was anchored for nearly 2 years while in port or anchored on the west coast of the United States or in Hawaii. The USS Arizona would later be overhauled from October 1940 to January of 1941 at Puget Sound Navy Yard in Bremerton, Washington. Search radar foundations were added to the foremast. The ship's anti-aircraft directors were also upgraded. The main mast also had 4 water-cooled 50-inch 12.7 millimeter M2 Browning machine guns installed on a platform at the top. Later, on February 3, 1941, the ship would be commanded by Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg. The ship would participate in night firing exercises on December 4th, alongside battleships USS Nevada and USS Oklahoma as part of Division 1. The U.S. Pacific Fleet would be stationed at Pearl Harbor as a deterrent to enemies attacking the western coastline of the United States. December 7, 1941 started out quietly at Pearl Harbor. Little did the personnel manning the ships know there were 6 Japanese aircraft carriers preparing to attack. Those aircraft carriers would launch planes that would reach the base just before 8 a.m. local time. The attack would catch all personnel off guard and would cause massive loss of life and devastation to the ships that were there. First wave. On December 7, 1941, explosions shattered the Sunday morning calm across Oahu. Japanese planes first attacked the airfields to destroy aircraft still on the ground. Then they converged on Pearl Harbor. Dive bombers screened down and heavily damaged the seaplane base at the left end of Ford Island. On the far side of the island, torpedo bombers attacked the Utah. On this side, they repeatedly struck Battleship Row. High-level bombers then stormed in to bomb battleships that torpedoes could not reach. One bomb detonated the Arizona's forward magazines. The ship exploded in a huge fireball. At 8:54 a.m., the second wave would arrive. Japanese pilots now faced fierce resistance. Bursts from anti-aircraft fire filled the sky before you. The Americans downed 20 aircraft. Earlier at 8:44, they had sunk a midget sub that had slipped into the harbor. Japanese high-level bombers pounded the airfields, while dive bombers struck more ships and fighter planes strafed the defenders. After about 2 hours, the attack finally ended. The Japanese had sunk or significantly damaged 21 vessels and over 300 aircraft. More than 3,500 people were dead or wounded. The USS Arizona would be targeted 7 times. The ship would suffer 4 direct hits and 3 near misses. Arizona's air raid alarm would sound and general quarters would be issued. Of the 4 hits that caused damage to the Arizona, the most catastrophic one occurred when a bomb hit the area around gun turret number 2. It would penetrate the deck and explode near the magazines located towards the front of the ship. The resulting explosion would rip apart the ship, as the bomb ignited the magazines below deck, causing them to explode. The resulting damage would cause fires that would burn for nearly 2 days. Of the 1,512 crewmen aboard the ship, 1,177 would be killed. Several sailors would receive medals for conduct in actions under fire. Medals of honor also went to Captain Van Valkenburg and Rear Admiral Kidd. The USS Arizona would also be awarded 1 battle star for her service during World War II. On December 29, 1941, the USS Arizona would be classified as inordinary. This meant that she would be temporarily out of service. Due to the extent of the damage, the ship was not able to be refloated and salvaged, and on December 1, 1942, the Arizona would be stricken from the Naval Vessel Register. Although her superstructure would be scrapped, her main armament would be salvaged and used on other vessels and places. The ship now sits mostly underwater and serves as a war grave. On March 7, 1950, Admiral Arthur Radford would institute the raising of the colors to fly over the wreck. The ship would later be designated a national shrine in 1962. A memorial platform was then built over the wreck site to honor those who had served and lost their lives. On October 15, 1966, the Arizona would be listed as a National Register of Historic Places, and later on May 5, 1989, the ship would be designated a National Historic Landmark. Surviving servicemen have had their ashes returned to the ship over the years, as well as scattering them above on the surface of the water. There has been a slow, steady oil leak since the ship's sinking that can be seen to this day.